All right, guys, welcome to the first online session of this consumer behavior class on attitude and attitude change. If you remember last week on the last presential class, we introduced the concept of attitude, and today we're going to focus on how attitudes can be influenced and changed by marketers. So this is what we're going to do. First of all, let's start with a little repetition of what attitudes actually were. We dissected attitudes into three different components, A, B, C, which are the cognitive, affective, and the behavioral component of an attitude, right? An attitude is reflected in what we think, what we feel, and what we do. And these three things together form the overall attitude. So if you remember, the hierarchy of these effects was flexible. So I can start thinking, doing, and then only feeling, but I can also feel first, do, then act second, and then only think. You might remember that there were different situations in which different orders were more likely or less likely. We're coming back to that later when we introduce processing tools. Thinking about the technical model, how attitudes are described, we talked about the attitude towards the object model or the ATO model, right? Or the Fishbein model, however you want to call it. Which in essence was about the following. It was on the one hand about drawing a weird table. In this case, I put the one on Frosted Flakes, Honey Nut Cheerios on the bottom right. Yet, in essence, it's about three things. On the one hand, it's about the product or object or whatever you're talking about in attitude, attributes. So what is important in a product? For instance, in this case, the first thing is taste, right? That's an important attribute. Then secondly, the evaluation of that attribute, like how important. Like in this case, 3 out of 3, very important because when it comes to food, taste is always one of the central things of food. And then last but not least, what's the belief? That is, how does the particular product at hand perform? Right? In this case, we see 8 out of 10 for Frosted Flakes. But maybe, for instance, we also see 8 out of 10 for Cheerios and only 7 out of 10 for mini wheats. So in this case, mini wheats have not as much as a good taste as Cheerios or Frosted Flakes. So attribute in general refers to a certain attribute of an object, and picking the right ones is crucial in the first place. The evaluation simply states how important is that attribute, and the belief is how does a particular product perform on that attribute. With these three things, I can basically sum up the entire attitude towards the product or an object or a person or whatever. A little bit mathematical, but we do that implicitly in a sense and form just positive and negative attitudes and sum out of it. And it's a definitely good tool for research. Okay, so that was the ATO model. We then talked about whether attitudes predict our behavior in isolation, and they don't. In practice, we talked about social influences, and this is exactly what led people. So, for instance, when people behave in certain ways that is not according to their own attitudes, typically often social influences make a big difference on them. You might remember a couple of examples I had on the in class. This is exactly what led to an extension of the attitude towards the object model, which is called the theory of reasoned action. The theory of reasoned action already looks a little bit more complicated than the attitude towards the object model, but only a little bit. If we dissect this graph, we pretty much easily see that the upper part, right, anything that is in the upper part shown here, right, is the ATO model. It's the belief strength and the belief evaluation that are multiplied about a certain attribute, summing up to the overall attitude. Same stuff, like literally the same model. And remember what's important in a product, how does the product perform, and how important is that particular attribute. In this case, this is the ATO model on top. What they added here is the lower part of the model. In this case, we're talking about the so-called subjective norm. What is a subjective norm? When we talk about subjective norms, basically we talk about social influences. So it talks about my normative belief, which simply means, do others think I should do it? And then on the other hand, Do I care what they say? So in this case, your attitude towards skipping class might be very positive because your evaluation of importance of going to class might be very low, and your belief about the quality of a certain class might be very low as well. So your attitude towards going towards class might be very low. However, there might be the normative belief of your parents, for instance, that they are paying for your classes and therefore you should go. And now it depends on your motivation to comply to your parents' orders, how your subjective norms will influence your behavioral intention of going to class, right? Your personal attitude might be low, but you might feel a certain pressure that you still end up doing stuff, right? So this is a little bit the idea and theory of reasoned action. If in turn you don't give a shit about what other people say, you might end up skipping class if that's what your attitude is about. However, if somebody who's relevant to you tells you you should go, you're rather likely to comply. So in essence, the theory of reasoned action is basically a mixture of our personal attitude and our subjective norm based on what others think I should do and do I care what they say. Right, so this is a little bit the theory of reasoned action enhancing the ATO model. Was developed by the same dude than the other one. So he, again, it's Fishbein behind this. So he has a couple of models that all look the same. Still, this is obviously a logical extension closer to reality, right? Yet we're taking a step back from only attitudes, we're including social aspects in here, but they also obviously make a big difference whether we do something or whether we don't. All right, so that's enough for attitude modeling. I think with that model, it's complex enough. For that on, we take it on to attitude change and persuasion. Right? Attitude change and persuasion are technically the same sense. If I change your attitude, I persuaded you to do so. Right? So that's the overall idea. And we're going to see a couple of things that we can look at when we change somebody's attitude. So marketing gives us a large set of tools here to operate. First of all, we can of course look at the ATO model, right? So at the upper part of the theory of reasoned action, or we can look at only the attributes, the beliefs, and the evaluation. The nice thing about this ATO model is that it gives us three ways of looking at stuff, right? We have the attribute, we have the belief, and we have the evaluation. And I can work on all three of them to change your overall attitude. For instance, I can change your beliefs. For instance, animation's going horribly wrong, pardon. If we look at those fish sticks up here, right? If we look at the fish sticks, they were emphasizing at a certain point in time that these had healthy omega-3 acids. Like that, I might update my belief on this brand of fish sticks, that they are actually more healthy than I thought. And I prefer these fish sticks over the competitors because they are healthy. They are healthier than what I thought. In this case, what they did is they didn't change anything with the fish sticks, actually. They did not change anything. They just changed the communication and changed and focused the aspect of these fish sticks are actually healthy. So I changed the belief if healthiness is an important attribute in buying fish sticks, I might change the attitude towards this particular brand of fish sticks, right? That's one thing I can do. I can tell you, for instance, hey, this Android device is actually easier to use than you thought, right? It's actually as easy to use as an Apple device. In that moment, I will change your belief on iOS, on Android devices, same thing. On the other hand, I can simply add new attributes, right? This is a sum of the number of attributes I include to be relevant. I can add a new attribute to it and thereby change your overall attitude. This is something that marketers have long realized. In this case, for instance, we all typically remember that when we had the chance of getting breakfast cereal as a kid, the most important thing in a breakfast cereal typically was the toy. The toy was the most interesting thing. The toy, however, was introduced by marketers in order as an attribute, as an additional attribute to make the product more attractive for kids. So in that case, our opinion as a kid was, the toy is the greatest thing ever. Now I want Jungle Mix. Screw it how it tastes, screw it how healthy it is. From a kid's perspective, the included toy is the most salient and most important attribute. And who has the better toy will get the bigger discussion between kids and parents in the supermarket about which breakfast cereal to buy, right? So they introduced a new relevant attribute, and thereby they change the entire attitude towards the overall object. And then last but not least, we can change the evaluations of something, right? That's what cigarettes did or tried to do when it first came out that they were unhealthy. They hired a shitload of doctors telling people that actually their health was not in danger when they smoked. So they tried to reduce the evaluation of the healthiness attribute for cigarettes as such, right? So this is didn't work in the end because eventually the truth came out and everybody knows that smoking is not that healthy after all. But it worked for quite a while. A couple of decades, cigarette companies weren't able to continue with the same level of profits because they just kept down, they artificially lowered the evaluation of that health attribute as an important decision when smoking, right? And by keeping people safe and perceived safe in that sense that they were thinking, hey, if doctors smoke or if doctors recommend, it can't be that bad after all. Let's not think about the health. That's not an issue here. So that was not something taking into consideration towards the attitude. So these are technically 3 strategic tools that I have. I can work on changing beliefs. My product is healthier than you thought. I can add new attributes, include a toy, or I can change evaluations by saying, hey, this is this attribute, what you are now considering to be very important in your evaluation actually doesn't matter, right? So it's sort of, the first part is, hey, my stuff is healthy and that's important to you. And the last part is, hey, this attribute that you're considering is actually more or less important than you thought. And that's why you should buy my product, because that's something that I offer or I don't offer. So that's the idea of taking literally this mathematical formula and work with the 3 elements that this mathematical formula provides. And that can strategically lead us to take certain actions when we have a certain attitudes towards our products, right? So if our attitudes, if the consumer's attitudes go down, I can think of all of these 3 things and wrap them up in a nice new marketing campaign, for instance. All right. Another part of it that we have talked a lot about, when we change attitudes, a lot of times we will face resistance. And this is due to the fact that something that is far away from our personal attitudes might be perceived as a contrast effect. Remember, contrast effects are typically negative. And for instance, if I have an attitude which is right here, I might be able to move my attitude towards a certain level, but not flip it 100%. Like if my attitude right now is neutral, I'll not be a lover from the first moment. This is something that gradually has to evolve, because people don't like to radically change. If you remember the session on personality a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that people like to be consistent. So it's damaging for our personality to say today, I hate this product, and tomorrow say, I love this product. A lot of convincing is necessary, and these attitudes typically need to be changed gradually. And typically we need to have, we need to make the proposed change within a so-called latitude of acceptance, like from neutral to mildly positive, from negative to neutral, or whatever is possible. But radical, the more radical the change is going to be, the more likely is it that people are not going to listen to you, and that people are going to reject your idea of changing their attitude, right? So this is something that is important to take into consideration. This is also, and this is why basically if I stay within the latitude of acceptance, I can assimilate or accommodate a new attitude within my current way of thinking. If I hit the latitude of rejection, like an extreme change to more positive or to more negative, basically I'll trigger a contrast reaction. So a negative reaction, and people will refuse to update their attitude. And that means we need to take into consideration current attitudes in order to make people change their mind, right? I always need to know where you're coming from to not lose you. For instance, this is something in a small way. If I want to tell you as a student that you did something not very well, I should always try to wrap it into a so-called sandwich of a part of a compliment on what you already did well, and then focusing on the aspects that you need to change. So frame the feedback that it falls into the latitude of acceptance so that you will actually do something about it. If I actively shout at you, typically I lose you right away. And if I tell you stuff like everything is bullshit, you're gonna block and don't even look at the different aspects that you might need to change, but just end up frustrating saying, I can't do this. So this is something that is extremely important. If we want to change somebody's attitude towards something, to frame the changes as a function of his current attitude and not making the change too extreme, the more likely he'll be to follow along. Okay, so that's social judgment theory in that sense, to make sure that an attitude change communication has to fall within a certain range and not be too extreme at the same moment. So, all right. If we now come to another part of marketing where attitudes are often changed, that's the so-called balance theory. Balance theory simply says that often companies are, often you as a person might admire a celebrity, right? And then by linking that celebrity towards a certain brand, you actually might like that brand more, right? You like the celebrity, in this case, sorry for my pre-World War II example of the back in the 90s big English star David Beckham and his sponsor deal with H&M. But however, you could replace that with Ronaldo and Nike or Messi and Adidas, same stuff. If you like Beckham or liked Beckham back in the days, you might be liking H&M more as a function of. If you are a Messi guy, you might like Adidas. If you're a Cristiano guy, you might like Nike. On the other hand, if you're somebody who likes Cristiano, you might in turn like Adidas less because Adidas is Messi, or however you want to put it, right? So this is something, it works in a triangle. Do you like that person? And that will reflect then, do you like the brand? On the other hand, if you already like a lot the brand and then don't like the person adjusted to it, you might also lower your attitude towards the brand. These things are typically linked and intertwined. So this is important when we look at balance. It all goes back and forth. Do I like the celebrity? I'll typically improve my brand attitude. On the other hand, if I really hate the brand, I might lower my attitude towards the celebrity, right? And so on and so forth. So it's a triangle, and it always hits in each direction. That's a little bit the idea of balance theory. And that's how companies try to change attitude towards their brands by linking the associative network about a celebrity to their own brand, right? If we look back at the structure of how associative networks work, this is why balance theory works. So another theory, how we can change attitudes towards a certain object or a brand. And then last but not least, there is the so-called elaboration likelihood model. The elaboration likelihood model distinguishes whether when we are faced with company communication or any incoming stimulus, that our brain can take two routes: the route of high involvement processing or the route of low involvement processing. Right? If we think about high involvement processing and attitudes, we typically think first, feel, and then act. Remember the purchasing a house. On the other hand, in the low involvement processing, we might think very quickly, act, and then start feeling, or we might in turn feel first, then act, and then only think. So in this case, these are the low involvement routes to persuasion and the high involvement route to persuasion. If we think about it, what does that remind us of? You might guess that the answer is again that we talk about system one and system two, right? The elaboration likelihood model is simply another visualization of system one and system two. If I go along the high involvement processing route, I have cognitive and reasonable arguments that make me change my beliefs and my attitudes and then lead to a behavior change. On the other hand, a low involvement processing might only lead to a belief change and a behavior change. I might not really have changed my attitude before the behavior. As an example, for instance, when Corona came out in mid-January, nobody really took it serious, including me. And then when it started to turn sour in Europe, a shitload of information came around why it was now important to flatten the curve, to stay at home. That's what we're all doing right now. And I was cognitively persuaded and changed my attitude towards the coronavirus relatively quickly because I actively read articles and information and I informed myself about it. And that led to a behavior change in the sense that I'm staying at home, even though I'm really reluctant to do so. And I would love to go outside because I get bonkers if I'm stuck in my home for too long. However, on the other hand, you might remember another example from a previous session when we talk about the peripheral route to persuasion and low involvement processing. You remember for men, it's good enough to just show them a red price. And by merely having them shown a red price, men think that that thing is on sale and they'll buy it, right? They just change the belief of a product being on sale, and that makes them change their behavior and purchase it without really actually thinking. An effective behavior and then only cognitive process, right? So without actually thinking in depth about it. This is the definition of a system one decision. And while the coronavirus attitude change from my personal example is a prime example of a system two decision. Without reading these articles in detail and understanding what's going on, I wouldn't have been able to change my mind about it, right? In the central route, thus the high involvement route to processing, we use central cues. We use reason, we use arguments, we use all of that in order to develop an enduring attitude change. In the peripheral route or the low involvement route to persuasion, we use so-called peripheral cues. So in that case, oh, the price is red, it must be on sale, I'll buy it. That's not really thinking about either whether I need it, it's not really thinking really about whether it's a good deal, it's simply taking the red price as a decision shortcut. Because it's a red price, it must be on sale, right? So those are the two different routes as a marketer I can go down to when I try to persuade you. And that's important to take into consideration, right? If we think about the methods I told you beforehand, for instance, if we talk about social judgment theory and the latitude of exception and the latitude of rejection, that would be a central route. I need to appeal to you with reason that you understand and update your attitude about something. On the other hand, when we talk about balance theory, that's rather a peripheral route thing. That's something that people don't really think about. Like at the moment when you see an H&M and then you remember that David Beckham came out in their last commercial, you might as well just go in because you have positive associations with David Beckham, and therefore you might want to explore the store that he's advertising for, right? So if we look at the previous models, we're looking at different techniques and different persuasion techniques in this case. So to make things clear again, here the central route is high involvement and the peripheral route is low involvement processing, right? To make sure that these two slides actually have the same language on it. Okay, so this is the elaboration likelihood model. When we now go towards, so we all know what are central cues. In this case, if we talk about performance attributes, that would also include the elaboration, the attitude towards the object model, right? In the sense that if I add new attributes and tell you that they are important, if I update either your beliefs All your evaluations, I actually have to convince you with arguments. On the other hand, as I said, the balance theory is rather an example of the peripheral. When we go now and go on to low involvement processing, that is sometimes that is important to think about in advertisement. If we look at it, most advertisement is simply low involvement system one processing. It's very rare that people devote their full attention to an advertisement. It's like advertisements are sinking in on us. We are seeing them in the periphery, like really peripherally when we walk through a city. So it's important that they are strong on peripheral cues and not so much on the central cues, or that they use both in case somebody puts attention to an ad. But the peripheral cues are extremely important in building these peripheral route arguments to persuasion, right? In marketing, often we talk about source effects and message effects. Let's quickly go through what they are. The source, in this case, is who sends a message, and the message is the content of the message, right? So in this case, next to the source of a message and the message content, a message can have a certain appeal. And in this case, to illustrate this, it's Lincoln. It must be a good thing what it says on this quote, and I trust it without even reading the quote, right? So that would be a source effect. Obviously, in this case, the message is a joke, and that might make you laugh. And in the end of the day, I might still make the point with this that you basically shouldn't believe everything that's on the internet. Something that's extremely important in this Corona times as well. Double check, fact check stuff. There's a lot of bullshit going on Facebook, and a lot of fake news, like literally fake news that try to spread panic among people. So always check the source and always check the message as such for these. But marketers obviously can play with these things. If we talk about message appeals, the classic strong message appeals might be sex, obviously. It might be fear, and it might be humor, right? Luckily, I'm recording this from home, so you can't smell my breath, if you know what I mean when I project this. We've talked about message appeals and message techniques earlier in this class, so I don't want to go too deep on that, but those things might all lead or serve as peripheral cues, in the sense that by laughing about a brand, I have a positive association with it, and the next time I'm confronted with the brand choice, I might actually purchase that brand. On the other hand, there might be certain source effects, and in this case, they might entail credibility, right? You might remember this dude. He was the best paid sportsman in the first decade of the 2000s, and then a scandal basically slowed that down for him, even though he has regained at least his sports credibility recently. There might be, this is something that is important to look at, an attractive source works better than a non-attractive source. And that's a mean thing to say, but when we talked about message and message content, we talked about the golden cut and the golden ratio, and that certain design effects being easy on the eye and being visually attractive are working very, very well. On the other hand, it might also be something like likability. This is Floyd Mayweather, and he was one of the most successful sportsmen in history, yet a lot of people hate him. So that might be something that might prevent a certain brand to hire him as a spokesperson, right? So these need to be taken into consideration. However, it's important, if we talk about peripheral cues, that it's most important that a brand appears saliently. There's a lot of debate, for instance, now with coronavirus, whether the brand Corona, beer brand, is affected positively or negatively. And I've heard both ways argumenting. Corona was heavily criticized the other week for a campaign that was entitled Corona Hits the Shore, about a new product that they were releasing. And I would also say they should have probably postponed that campaign while Corona literally hit the shore of the country in which that advertising campaign was launched. Yet, interestingly, making people talk so much about Corona, Corona, Corona all day, then seeing a beer at the end of the day in the convenience store with that name might be interesting, and it might be even fun to post it on social media. So the salience of the brand name is quite high right now. and also the joke in itself and the irony of that might be something that draws people rather towards the brand than it drives people away. Discussing that with several marketing experts, I was wrong initially. I thought they would suffer from it, and I was convinced by people who work in marketing that that's actually not the case. So the idea is also, remember, brand associations, if they are strong, they make the brand easy to access. And the strong dominance of the word Corona right now is a peripheral cue enough that when faced with the decision of which beer to buy, I might just opt for the Corona over my regular brand I'm typically buying, right? So this is something that is important. This is not because people really evaluate the beer now any different. It's just because that brand is salient in their minds, and that's enough for low involvement decision to facilitate our decision making. All right, that should be enough for today. As a task, I will also have these slides as a PDF form uploaded, by the way. As a task, I want you to analyze using the attitude towards the object model or the theory of reason action to analyze what might happen to Italy and Spain as major tourist destinations given the current situation, right? What attributes, evaluations, and beliefs are changing right now? And I'm talking about right now, nobody can travel. But at the moment when the traveling ban is lifted again, what's going to happen to the countries that are affected most by the coronavirus and are major tourist destinations, right? I could have put in Germany here, but Germany lives less of tourism as Italy and Spain. And I could have put China in here, but China, in the same case as Germany, doesn't really live off tourism. So I think it's interesting to look at the case of Italy and Spain as major tourist destinations, how the attitudes towards these two countries might be affected by the current pandemia that's going around the globe, right? And just think about how initially people's attitudes towards China changed when the virus came out, and convey that to those two countries and make a technical analysis. What are the attributes, what are the beliefs, and what are the evaluations that are changing in it? And what might be the subjective norms that are changing? Maybe your mom doesn't let you travel anymore to China. I don't know. And then last but not least, develop some ideas and creative things what tourist offices should do. Give some recommendations using two approaches how attitudes are changed. The toolbox was given today. So a paragraph on each, so a page in total, right, would be a nice way to deliver this. Deadline is next Wednesday, because on Friday we're having the exam, and you don't have to do this homework prior to the exam because the entire attitude part was not part of the exam. We will address any questions in the live session on Wednesday. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye-bye.